Hello, welcome everybody. It's February the 14th, 2025. Into the Fire, coming to you live from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I'm so glad that I'm here. I'm a little tired, but I'm glad that I'm here. I'm glad that all of our faithful listeners have joined us. Hopefully we've got a lot of the OGs. Oh, we do. I just tuned in to see how many's tuning in, and all the regulars are here. I love it. I've had a really busy week. I actually caught a double murder last weekend. It was, I think I'd mentioned that I was up for the next murder, and I ended up getting 4 people got shot. 2 ended up unfortunately dying. And so my week has been beyond busy, trust me. But this is going to be a fun guest this week. It's Michael Cantrell. And I got to say, yesterday I actually drove down to Oklahoma City, and my nephew, one of my nephews, I'm proud of all 3 of my nephews, but one of my nephews actually graduated from the Oklahoma City Police Academy. So there he is. He's just he hates it to hear this, but he is kind of like a baby. He's 21. He was the youngest one out of the 22 people in the academy, and his uncle is super proud of him because that is not an easy accomplishment. And that's what happened. The other thing I want to mention too, I had Mike Elam on the show, and Mike is, I would say that he is literally the authority when it comes to the Pusser case. And this is his book. And he joined me when I was speaking in Fort Smith, Arkansas recently. If you haven't got this book, consider it. It's a great book. Just to show you my reading list that I've got going on right now. This is what I'm literally actively reading all of these books, and most of which, actually all of them have been either on the show or going to be on the show. And tonight's guest actually comes to us from a recommendation from Philip Parker. He's an extraordinary, he's a warden, and he wrote this book, Guard, which I'm about 2/3 done with this, and it's excellent. So thanks, Warden Parker, for recommending Mr. Cantrell, and I think we're going to have a really good show tonight. So let's jump into this. I want to get into Michael Cantrell, who is the host of the Prison Officer Podcast, another podcast that I'm telling you, I've been listening to several of these episodes, and they're excellent. And he's got a lot of really good guests that come on there. And Mike has worked in corrections for more than 30 years. He's now retired from the Bureau of Prisons. He is a writer and speaker on leadership, resilience, and crisis management. Michael has published over 50 articles in print and online, and he has also written 4 books, including Born of the Ozarks, Monotonous Chaos, Finding Your Purpose, which is crafting a personal vision statement, and The Keys to Your Career. All of which, when I was kind of reading the descriptions of these, it's just impressive because he's got like a one-stop shop to be a better, not just a correction officer, honestly. And I know that's focused towards that, but really, if you were wanting to get into anything in law enforcement, I think that he's got some stuff that's valuable to listen to. And like I said, that podcast is amazing. And some of the places that he has actually served in the world of corrections are he started out in 1992 to 1993, Missouri State Penitentiary, the Ozark Correctional Center in Fordland, Missouri, Bureau of Prisons at Leavenworth. And if you're talking about Leavenworth is one of those handful of federal prisons that people are familiar with. Atlanta, a lot of people, of course, Alcatraz back in the day, but that's what Leavenworth is a just incredibly famous prison. In addition to that, he worked at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners, prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, where he was a lieutenant. And actually, what's interesting there, he was telling me off air that this is the place where some of the most notorious inmates, like John Gotti, and really, it's probably where they all end up going before they die. And then he went to the Administrative United States Penitentiary in Thompson, Illinois. He's worked he was the chief of emergency preparedness in Washington, D.C. He's a master instructor for Pepperball. And finally, he's the director of correctional training, Command Presence. And let's just bring him in. Mike, thank you for being here, buddy. I'm telling you're somebody that I can see why the Warden Parker recommended you to come on here, because I had him on my show, and I know you did too.
Yeah, he was great.
He's great. He is just an amazing guy with a lot of great stories. And so tell us a little bit about the start for Michael Cantrell and where you grew up and how did you end up getting into this world of corrections that you've got quite the background. It's impressive. Tell us how you ended up there.
Yeah, it wasn't something I ever planned. Now, I probably knew I was going to be in public service. You know, my father was a firefighter, retired from the Springfield, Missouri Fire Department. I grew up, we went camping, we went vacations, everything we did, I was surrounded by firefighters and police officers and city managers. And, you know, that was just the whole group. That was the people I knew. So I actually spent a little bit trying to get on a couple of police departments. And we talked during the break about it's a whole different world now. I mean, there used to be 800 people show up and, you know, you had to fight your way to the top to get those jobs. You didn't just walk up and get them. But I was working as a cook at the time and looked in the paper, saw a deal that said cook wanted, Missouri State Penitentiary. Had no idea what that place even was and applied for it. They called me up. They said, we don't need cooks. We want correctional officers. You want to be a CO? And I said, I don't even know what a CO is. And she probably said, probably, you know, the craziest thing looking back on it now, she said, well, COs just make sure inmates do what they're supposed to. And that's just, you know, we do everything but that, really. You know, we're everything inside from firefighters to laundrymen to plumbers to, you know, a CO is everything inside a prison. So that was how I started. Missouri State Pen was a great place to start. You know, it was known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America back then. It was built in 1838. It's the oldest penitentiary at the time west of the Mississippi, up until 2004 when they closed it. And it was violent. I mean, I walked into a place, I'd been in fights on the Ava Square. I'd, you know, fought in high school, but I had never had anybody come at me with a knife or a fist or a lock and a sock or stuff like that. I mean, it was a violent place. And as a normal human being, you're just not ready for that, you know, growing up just regular. I mean, I went to high school in Springfield or in Mansfield, Missouri, grew up in Springfield, Missouri. So yeah, it was really crazy. That was where I started.
And well, by the way, was that prison that you just spoke of, was that prison haunted?
Well, a lot of people say it is. You know, lights go on and off at night. I've personally never seen a ghost, but if there is a ghost anywhere, Missouri State Pen is the place it's got to be. A lot of people died while I was there. I know there's been people dying there for 150 years. So, yeah.
Not just anybody dying. We're probably talking about a lot of evil people dying too,
Absolutely.
to boot. So yeah, absolutely.
I saw
oh, did you?
I don't know if you remember. There used to be. You ever heard of the serial killer Robert Berdella out of Kansas City?
I've heard the name.
You might remember it because when they found him, one of his people that he'd been torturing and I don't know how graphic we get on here, but torturing and having sex with a young man that he'd taken off the street escaped and was running down the street naked. And that was how they discovered that he had done this to like 7 other young men. And they were buried in that yard and all that stuff up there. The Kansas City Butcher, I think, was what they called him.
Okay. Yeah, I have heard of him. Yeah, that's crazy. So you start out there. And what was, you know, I've heard you ask somebody else this question. I thought it was fantastic. And that was, what was some of was anything dispelled? You probably had a preconception of what that would be like walking through those doors. And then you hear that large metal door shut behind you. What was about when you walked in there that was not what you'd expected?
Yeah. You think I would have known more about corrections. You know, I grew up in public servants. I grew up around cops. I knew people went to jail, but I really had nothing in my head about what I was going to walk into. And in my brain, I thought I was going to be more of a public servant. You know, I thought that the way people looked at you, I figured the way inmates looked at you would be more the way police officers get looked at. And it's nothing like that. The public doesn't like you. The inmates don't like you. The media doesn't like you. You're always the bad guy. No matter what you do, the only time you get in the news is when somebody escapes or when somebody dies.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
I
You're right.
I didn't expect how people were going to hate me for what I did. I think that's the biggest thing that surprised me. Now, the first time you walk in and you hear that door shut and you realize, and that's really not because there's lots of people around you that time. The first time you sit in a housing unit with 120 guys and the door shuts and everybody else is on the other side of that grill, that's when it kicks in. Yeah.
Yeah, because you may be responsible. I tell you what, when I go to the prisons, every now and then I have to interview somebody, and I got to tell you, man, I heard you say there was another guest that you had on there recently that was talking about how some cops couldn't do that, and I don't know that I could do it. I mean, I can get along with people, and I can talk to just about anybody, but the difference between your job and mine is when I deal with those same people, they're on their best behavior for me. Because they want to make it look like, oh, there's no way they could have done anything. But yet when you get them, they're at a point where some of which are there forever, and there's nothing you can do to these guys. And so sometimes when we're walking through there, it's a little bit scary because there might be one correction officer with you and you're walking through the middle of the yard. Yeah. And that's a little bit scary. I mean, for me it was, but that's something that I'm sure you get used to in due time.
It becomes normalized.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
One of my best friends is a police officer in Springfield, Missouri, and he always he loves prison stuff. He loves that stuff. He's like, man, I don't know how you walk in there. And I'm like, dude, I don't know how you walk up on a car and not know whether it's a bad guy or a good guy.
Yeah.
I know what I'm dealing with, and I'm comfortable with it after so many years, But yeah, it's just what you get used to. But it becomes normalized.
Well, I think that the other thing too for me is that of course, I'm fascinated with the stories of all of the inmates. That would be something that I would be interested in. And I hear a lot of people that are in the prison system and so forth that are correction officers that they really don't even care to know really what these guys are in for. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that that's across the board. I'm sure there's some people. How could you not know on some of those guys or gals? I have heard that the female prisons are some of the worst as far as just the drama and the craziness.
Think about it as a police officer. And this is why we don't. And a lot of us, most of us, don't look into it unless we have to. But if you were walking up on a car and you didn't know you didn't know what was going on in the car, but you already had this list of this guy's killed 3 people and, he's done this or he's hurt this person, how would you treat that person? Mm-hmm. Would you be treating them fair or would you be treating them with what you were expecting from what you'd read? And so we try to back away from that so that we don't misuse our power. Does that make
it makes great sense.
Yeah, it's not as much up here as it is. I've got to give them the justice that they have coming, right? Because my job isn't for punishment.
No, of course, and I know that makes great sense. That really does, and so that's probably why. Well, that's probably why you've been able to last in this system for over 30 years. And I mean, that's pretty rare in and of itself, I would think. I would think that that profession it's probably got a pretty decent turnover rate. I mean, I know a couple of people that work in the California Department of Corrections, and they made a career out of it. So that's got to be just a fascinating world each and every day. And I think what's interesting about your job too, and I just have to, people, that's why 60 Days In is popular. That's why, I can't remember the name of the show, but it was a show about, you probably know what it is, but it's about New Mexico prison where they're training these cadets. And when you watch these guys, you're just like, oh my gosh, you're shaking your head because, you can see guys getting manipulated and that would probably be the hardest thing to really get used to. At least in my world, I've got a little bit more control of what's going on. Actually, you're kind of living in their world. Yeah. And so forth. And you get institutionalized probably a little bit. I mean, you're in prison a third of your life, you've spent 10 years of your life easy, probably more like 15 and closer to 20 of your life in prison. So, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure you're probably watching over your back and always suspicious of people. Is that something that you kind of deal with still to this day?
Retirement.
Or did you ever deal with that? Or, because I've heard a lot of guys say that they are really, really uneasy in a lot of different places, with a lot of people.
And I absolutely dealt with that. Matter of fact, my wife, we'd be at the school at the Boy Scout meeting, and she'd walk up and she'd go, "Quit your correctional officer stance." Because I'd have my back to the wall with my arms crossed, watching everything that's going on with a bunch of 8-year-olds,
Right.
But so she was good for me. I've been married 32 years.
Good for
So
you.
yeah, that's a tough thing. That's something that you don't see a lot. 30 years in prison, but 32 years married without a divorce is pretty rare also. But she was good for me and kept me grounded. And I guess what I would say to most correctional officers is don't let that job become the only thing you do. I competed in Scottish Highland Games, strength sports. I did that for 15 plus years. So I always had something to look forward to on the weekends, working out, going to the games and stuff like that. We went camping. My wife and kids, we went to 83 of Missouri's 90 state parks. So that was what kept me from just falling completely into it. If the only thing you do is live with the people that you work with and then drink with them every night, you're going to get so wrapped up in that you're not going to be able to see that there's anything good, because it's tough. It's tough to see that there's good outside the fence.
Yeah, I would see that would be the case. So you have the thing that's interesting about you, and the reason that I just love having you on here is because I'm trying to, for those of you that have never heard of his podcast or looked at his books, throw his books up there, Amanda. He's written 4 books, and these books are they're really just to be able to do that, Mike. That's got to be a tremendous amount of discipline just to sit down and write these things. I mean, really, I've wanted to write one, but you have actually done it, and they're really the types of books, like for instance, this one right here, I love. The Keys to Your New Career. And this is kind of giving somebody the roadmap, I would think, of how to not just do this job, but to be successful at it and be the best that you can be while doing it. And that's the kind of stuff that I love that too. Finding your purpose. This is the kind of stuff that I think is amazing. And you're the exact type of guest that I love coming on here, because you are somebody that's just not blending in. You're actually doing something to better your entire occupation, so to speak.
Try.
And those are the type of guests that I've noticed that you also have on your show, is people that are really standouts. And so what was it that kind of got you started with the books and then the podcast, and I'm sure it's somewhat therapy for you a little bit.
Yeah. The first book was Monotonous Chaos. And I used to sit around when, it was midnights or whatever, and I was in some pretty dark places, as far as mentally. And so I would write poetry. And what's in there is, that one is out of print, I think. What's in there is real dark poetry. And it's all about prison and what I saw, and the hate and the manipulation and the stuff like that I saw. So I had written that on the back of pieces of paper and napkins. And then one day I decided I was just going to put those together. So that was the first one. Born of the Ozarks is about my great-grandmother, so it's not prison-oriented. But then when I started the podcast because I want people to see that there's correctional officers, men and women, who are some of the most amazing workers in the world. And they're hidden behind those fences and those walls, and nobody, you don't know what they're doing until one bad thing happens. We can keep 100 inmates from committing suicide, tramping through blood, cutting them down, doing mouth to mouth, pumping on their chest, keeping them alive. But one inmate dies, and that's what's on the front page news. We never get recognized for the other. So that's why I did the podcast. I wanted to show people that there's great people, some of the best leaders, some of the best organizers, emergency management. They all work inside these prisons. So I started the podcast. And I started having rookies, and I just got one the other day, and he's like, "Hey, I got on at FCI Sheridan at the BOP, just finished the academy. I've been watching your podcast. I love all the stuff, and it's helping me find contraband." And I get these things. So that's what I wrote the Prison Officer Podcast, Keys to Your Career, because they kept asking me, where do I go? What do I do? And the first part of that book, the first half, is, kind of me and my thoughts and how to be a good correctional officer, how not to be a pain in the ass be a good rookie. And the second half of the book is actually an appendix that lists every state Department of Corrections, federal corrections, private corrections, their minimum requirements, how to get a hold of them. So if somebody wants a job, it's kind of twofold there. This is what you do, and this is where you go. And right now, a lot of people don't realize, for the first time ever, a correctional officer is a commodity. Okay. When I came in, nobody cared. Now they're throwing bonuses, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 at guys to start in corrections, in jails and prisons. So the other thing I tell guys is shop with that book. Don't just take the first job. Find the job that fits you. Find the one that makes you the most money. You mentioned California Department of Corrections. They've always been one of the highest paid, but there's lots of agencies coming on behind that. And then I'll go ahead, and since I've talked about them, finding your purpose. And finding your purpose, I give a training with also, because, and I talk a little bit about it in there. In 2011, I walked out of Springfield one night, and I'd worked 4 16-hour shifts in a row. And I'm standing in the parking lot, and I'm looking around. I don't know where my car's at. I don't know where my life's going. I'm just done. I'm just beat. I've been working doubles for forever. And I just knew that night something had to change. And I ran across an article about writing out a personal vision statement. And so I did that. I sat down and put to paper who I wanted to be, what I wanted to be. And once you do that, and that's what that workbook does, is kind of help you craft it. Once you do that, every decision you make from then on is easy, because the only thing you do is go, does that fit where I'm going? Is that who I want to be? And so that's where that came from. And so now I share that with people, and hopefully I'm going to a college up in northern Missouri in a few weeks and talking to a business class up there, and going to teach them personal vision statements.
I love it. I love it. So you're just, and there's stuff that can be taken from this regardless of your career. You could, absolutely. And I think that the number one most important skill that we have is our ability to communicate. That's for cops, really. I mean, and I don't see it any different. I think that your ability to communicate in the world of a prison or the jail for that matter, is you are able to calm things down and reason with people and de-escalate things, and just your ability to communicate is paramount, and that's the most important skill that you have, at least in our tool. Plus, you guys don't have all the weaponry that we have. You don't have anything like that. You have to use a little bit of verbal judo to get people to do what you're going to want them to do.
Our tool belt's up here.
Yeah,
there's nothing on our tool belt.
Yeah,
maybe some OC.
What was probably the worst prison or the most challenging prison that you worked at?
I would have to say in what manner, but the most violent was definitely Missouri State Pen. I mean, the violence there, the blood, I saw people make shanks that you can't even imagine, almost as long as half your arm. Saw a guy sitting on top of another one, chipping the concrete under him as he stabbed him. I saw a guy lay down and cut both femoral arteries with razor blades and toothbrushes. Or I didn't see him do that. We showed up a few minutes later, and he was already dead. And, blood was everywhere. I didn't know there was that much blood in a human body. Wow. So I saw some violence and stuff there that was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Leavenworth was very gang-oriented, a lot of gangs. So there was gang violence quite often there. But you get addicted to that rush, you get addicted to it. Now, the most challenging one was opening up Thompson Prison, which was a prison that Illinois built in 99. The Federal Bureau of Prisons bought it in 2014. We had to retrofit the whole damn thing and then move all the maximum security inmates in it. And it was done with no funding and no, I'm going to say this, no backing from the people above, because they didn't, the directors and stuff didn't want that prison. So that was a tough job. I spent a little over 4 years there doing a job with nothing. But I did get to work with some of the best people I've ever worked with. They tried very hard. It's been There's been a lot of problems with it since then. But when we were there, we had it up and running. We were taking care of some of the worst inmates in the country.
Yeah. So your podcast is going strong. And how long have you been doing that?
2020.
Oh, so long, man, long time. Long time.
2020, yeah.
Yeah.
I only do it every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks, and they're about an hour or hour and change. Or
I have found that the hour is the best.
Yeah, and I think that I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, if you check that out, you're going to see what I'm talking about. It's outstanding. You should give him a follow and a like.
I'm super lucky. I've had the best luck at finding good people, and a lot of it's come from LinkedIn. You know?
There are a lot of good people on there for sure. Absolutely. So
lucky.
Yeah, I sometimes when I'm really I'm kind of searching because, of course I've got a list in my mind as to who I want, and some of them are above that level to where they're just not really accessible, so to speak. But then you can always ask. I mean, there's some of them believe it or not, I'm shocked that they've said yes.
Me too.
But you know what I mean. And then so. Yeah, I think that's amazing. The thing about your industry too that I think is just fascinating is that everybody they don't want it in their backyard. They don't want a prison in their backyard or in their neighborhood zip code or in that section of the state. But they're glad that they exist, and they usually want more of them.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that everybody's fascinated because they want to know what goes on up inside of there. That's my take. There's that curiosity. And I wonder what it's like. And every time you drive by, even for me, I've been a cop for 26 plus years. I know that there's a lot of killers that I've put in there, and I'm still fascinated. Like, I wonder what's going on right now up inside of that prison. And I haven't been to all of them in Oklahoma, but I've been to several of them, and it's just a fascinating world. Honestly, it is, because I think it's more the unknown. I don't know that it's fascinating maybe to you, but for the outsider, it's just kind of like, I wonder what's, you know what I mean? You have to know what I mean.
It's absolutely fascinating. It's like a foreign planet. People don't understand. There's a economy that goes on in there that has nothing to do with the economy that goes outside the fence. They buy and sell things that would make most people just wonder. Information gets bought and sold in there, literally.
Well, give me an example of for an example, what is some of the things that you would get bought and sold in there that you're just kind of like, what? I know that the price of cell phones is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard over $2,000. It's probably even, it could be more than that for a smartphone. I don't know. What is the going rate for something like that, if you're even allowed to say?
Oh, it depends on the prison. Depends on it depends on access. If you've got a bunch of them getting dropped in, if you've got visitors bringing them in, if you've got dirty staff, price goes down. If you don't have that stuff and contraband's being controlled more, price goes up. So, I mean, it's supply and demand like anything else, that touches on why things are valuable inside. I'll give you a great example. When I was working at Springfield, there was this old mental health inmate. He'd been there for years. And in the 70s, they'd given them their own coffee cup. This was a green coffee cup. And somebody knows sports better than I do. But this would have been early 2000s or late 2000s. Anyway, I think it was Green Bay, because their stuff's the green and yellow. And anyway, that coffee cup was that color. And he was the only one that still had one. He'd kept it for 20 years. And there were fights. 2 fights happened over that coffee cup because all of a sudden everybody else wanted a green coffee cup. Mm-hmm. So it's just stuff like that can just blow your mind. You have people, there's a whole economy there. You have inmates that go to food service, and one of them will steal a tomato, and one of them steals some bread, and one of them steals an onion, because nobody can go steal all of it or you get caught. So they each go steal something. And then they bring it back, and then for a book of stamps or whatever, they give it to the sandwich guy. Now, the sandwich guy takes that, he makes sandwiches out of it, then he walks around the housing unit and sells those sandwiches with all the pieces that were taken from food service originally. So there's these economies that go on. It's not just drugs. People think, well, it's all drugs and hooch. No, everything's valuable in there if there's only one. Let a T-shirt show up that doesn't, that's not a white T-shirt with 7 numbers on it. And holy mackerel, they'll kill each other over stuff like that.
And how do they even get to keep that stuff? I mean, I would think that would be next to impossible.
Well, it's contraband. When you've got 2,000 or even 1,000 inmates, there's no way. And somebody asked me this not too long ago. Well, why do you let them have it? Okay, why do you let them have guns on the street? Because there's so much of that stuff. We go in there, we work hard, we search, but you can't get all of it. And you got 1,000 inmates trying to make weapons, and you're finding 1 or 2 a day. You're behind the curve,
right?
So you got inmates making hooch. We find it, we dump it, and somebody. But it's a deal of numbers. It's just like the border, I guess. If they send enough people with drugs towards the border, surely 1 or 2 of them will get across. Yeah, and that's kind of the way it works with us.
Well, my brother-in-law spent a fair amount of time in prison. And I remember when I went and visited him one time, and I remember, well, first of all, I was a little bit concerned because of what I did. I was afraid that somebody might and this is before I was on TV and stuff, but I was still afraid that somebody might recognize me and then it would cause problems for him. So I did not go very often, and it had nothing to do with me not liking the guy. Actually, I really liked the guy, but I remember asking him, I mean, his outfit, the prison suit that he was wearing, the shirt and the pants, man, this thing, you could stand it up in the corner. This thing was starched to another level. You couldn't go to a dry cleaners and get it like that. And I asked him, I was like, what in the heck? How do you even get that done here? He's like, oh yeah, you pay a guy to do it. And you pay another inmate to do it. And I said, well, how in the heck, where do they even get anything to do that? And he says, it's cornstarch. And that's what they did. And I thought, man, that's a whole nother industry between that and haircuts and tattoos and, all that other stuff too.
If you've got money, you can pay other people to do it. If you don't have money, then you've got to find something to do to make some money, because not everybody's got families sending them, putting money on the books.
And this is kind of a crazy question too, because I find myself being a little bit of a softie. There's some of these killers, believe it or not, when I'm interviewing them, I'm like, they're likable. I mean, some of them actually are, and some of these guys that and gals that you run across in my industry. Of course, I've been dealing with criminals for close to 27 years. Some of them you kind of like, they're likable. Some of them, and so in your years of 30 years, I'm sure have you ran across guys that you're just like that you actually grew to really like over the years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. None that I've ever trusted, but absolutely the ones that you like. I will take a housing unit full of first-time murderers all day long. Most of those guys have gotten it out of their system. They'll never kill anybody again. Now, I don't want a housing unit full of serial killers, but
right.
They're crazy.
Well, my brother-in-law said the same thing. He goes, I said, who do you hang around with over in here? And he goes, I hang out with the killers, because that was usually a one and done, and they don't want any drama. They just want to serve their time and move on. It's the young gangsters that are coming in there that are the youngsters, and the guys that are in there trying to prove themselves and all that jazz he's like, it's just miserable. But I think that's really interesting. There was a guy that I'd actually interviewed once in a prison, and he was a blood gang member, and just an interesting guy. And of course he's constantly looking over his shoulder every time a guard would walk by, or a correction officer would walk by in the background. You see him on the other side of the glass even. And I'd said, hey man, what's up? He goes, man, I don't trust any of those guys. But as this guy was talking, he was incredibly charismatic and just really, really smooth. And I asked I said, man, you have to be running things up in here. And he pulled his shirt over, and he had like lapels tattooed on both of his shoulders with 4 stars. And I said, see, I knew you were running things. And he goes, well, everybody answers to somebody else, meaning that there was somebody above him too. And but anyway, I just think that so from that, you've written all these books. I hope that they're selling like crazy, because there's a lot of great content. That book that you're talking about with the key to careers, that actually reminds me of a law enforcement guide of where to go. It's called The Baron's Guide to Law Enforcement Careers. That sounds very, very similar to that. And I think that's outstanding that you're actually giving people advice as to how to go about it. What is your advice for somebody right now? Because we talked about this off air. I actually applied for the Bureau of Prisons.
Sure.
way back. And back then when I applied, you've been in the business longer than me, but when I applied, man, it was near impossible to even get on. Nowadays, I know in law enforcement nowadays, as long as you haven't done meth in the last, I mean, I'm being real. I mean, for real.
Can you fog a mirror? No, it's not quite that bad. But it is easier these days. But don't forget, I guess my advice is don't forget, like I said, you're a commodity. Don't just jump on the first one. Shop for the job that you want. If you've got experience doing something else, and it doesn't always have to be law enforcement experience. If you've been managing something with several employees, then you should walk in there and say, I'm not starting at the level 1 correctional officer. I want, let me be a correctional officer 2 or senior officer or whatever they call it, because I have some management experience. You've got that leadership already. What you need to learn is the corrections portion of it. I love somebody put up here, did you get the being manipulated? That's what you have to learn. If there's one thing a rookie needs, there's 2 things a rookie needs. One is to be able to keep his mouth shut when people are talking to him, because the guy that's been there before you knows more about you, knows more about it than you do. I don't care who you are. When I went from 8 years of the state to feds, I kept my mouth shut because I didn't know the fed system. I knew that system. I knew basics, but I didn't know that. And then the other thing is to learn how to say no. And that's why the thing with the manipulation caught my eye, because, so many people, even on the street, police officers too, it's a hard thing for people to say no. In corrections, you have to be able to say no, and not no because it's policy or no because the warden said so. No, because this is my housing unit and this is the way I run it. And while I'm here, we're going to do it this way. And that will get you respect. Being wishy-washy or giving some people a no and some people a yes, and nobody ever knows what your answer is going to be, that's where you get into problems. If they know that you're a guy who stands up for what he believes in, you know who you are, you walk through there with your head up, your shoulders back, your shoes shined, you're going to have very little problems. If you go through there and you look like somebody that can be manipulated, you're going to have problems. Because manipulation, those guys, what we have to be careful of, and you talked about some of those guys are, they're really easy to talk to. Well, nobody talks to you in prison unless they have to. Okay. And they're either doing it to get information or to get closer to information. You've got that orderly who likes mopping in front of your door. Well, he does not mop in front of your door 12 times a day because he likes looking at you. He's waiting to hear something when you and the officer are talking about this or that, or the Bob over there, he's been gambling, he's broke. Brenda over there, she's hanging out with so-and-so, and that's what he's looking for, because he'll go and sell that information. And then there's other inmates who are manipulators. They're good at it. They've practiced it their entire life. And they'll start befriending an officer. And that's how these officers get caught up, is not understanding that you always have to have that distance. You can't let them in the shell. The problem is we get outside of prison, and guess what we carry out with us? That shell. And I don't have to have a shell when I talk to you outside of prison, but I do, because I get so used to walking around that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It really does. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So, yeah, it makes tremendous sense. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that's the whole thing is. Now, when you started doing this, I'm sure I'm just going out on a limb here, not knowing really how they trained you. I would just assume that they didn't train you very much. And I'm hoping that today it's probably tenfold the amount of training that they did from back in the day.
Depends on where you're at. If you're going to California or New Jersey, where you're an actual peace officer, you're going to go through a full academy. The Federal Bureau of Prisons still has 3 weeks of basic training. Now, they call some OJT, but if they're short that week, your OJT's by yourself. There's nobody else working. Hey, go hit 2-walk. You're on 2-walk,
Mm-hmm.
I talked to the jails are the really scary thing for me, because, I talk to these guys when I go out and train, and I just ran into a guy in Iowa, and he was able to give his newest rookie a day and a half training before he put him in the house. Now, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I mean, you have the ingredients for disaster,
Yeah.
really.
That's
I mean,
how
anything
short
can
they
happen.
are.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. But yeah, that's insane, really.
And I think
So
that's why part of the reason my podcast has done so well is because I do hear from these rookies all the time that they're listening to it. Like I said, it's the people I interview. It's not just me, but they're getting to listen to people who have spent a lifetime working in prisons. Just like Philip Parker. You can learn so much listening to that podcast with him, and I listened to the one that when you had him on too. He's such a wealth of information. But for a rookie to be able to hear somebody like that and hear their stories and hear how they did it, I think it's invaluable.
yeah, I think that's one of the huge things about podcasts. Period.
It
This
is.
is a lot of voice for all of the normal people that are out there in the workforce to actually have a platform to even bring people like myself or you or any type of a profession on to really kind of talk about how it really works. You said something about keeping your mouth shut, and that's something that my dad would teach me two things. They're the two things that he really taught me, and he was a California highway patrolman back in the 70s, and he would say, shut your mouth and listen. You don't know what you're doing. And he would tell me this, and here I am. I'm an adult, and he's still telling me the same thing. He goes, every time I'd go to a new unit or I would go to a different area of whatever I was doing, he would just say, just listen. So I remember sitting at a table, at a squad table. I think I had 11 years on the department, and in the summer times I'd work the streets. I was a school resource officer, but I still wore a uniform and drove a police car. And I was sitting at this table, and everybody sitting at this table has got like 30 to 35 years on, right? The old gray-haired guys working day shift. These guys are disgruntled. Some of them, most
Yep.
of them, I would say, some of them still liked humanity. But I remember the old sergeant going, "Hey, White, how come you never say anything?" And I said, "Sir, I haven't even earned the right to speak at this table.
Yeah.
I am just listening." And I remember that they really appreciated that. And that was something that I think that we're kind of missing a little bit of that right now with this younger generation, perhaps. So hopefully that's something they listen to. But the other thing was that he taught me, which is even more important, honestly, it was that make sure that your badge is the same size it was the day they issued it to you, not 5 sizes too big, meaning treat people right. I just told my nephew that just got on Oklahoma City PD, and I'm like, just treat people right. And I'm not advocating back rubs in the community, but it doesn't say anywhere in the rule book that you can't be nice to people.
Sure.
Don't give up your safety, but you can generally be nice to people, and it'll get you a long ways. And I have no doubt that that's probably advice that you tell people when you're starting them out
Yeah.
in this world too. And you're training now, and so I'll just have to say this too. I trained. I've been to Kentucky. Have you trained in Kentucky?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been there probably. You've probably been all over the country, but I've been to Kentucky specifically, like 6 times just to talk to the Department of Correction people. And the thing that really impressed me about the correction officers in Kentucky was how serious they took the training,
Yeah.
and they really did. I mean, they were there wasn't any messing around while you were speaking. They were listening intently on everything that you would talk about, and I was impressed with the level of professionalism, and really the fact that a lot of them, it seemed to me like they really treated this as a career for years,
Sure.
and if not the whole time. So is it like that for you when you go other places? I mean, have you seen other, not to call anybody out state-wise, but do you find that in most places?
Yeah. And let me give you a little bit of a clue what's going on there. Okay. And this is not to put down police officers in any way, but police officers get a level of money and training that corrections can only dream about when they're off, laying in their bed. I wish I could have that training. I paid
Right.
for a lot of my own training over the years. So you have these officers that work 16, 16, 16, 16. They're wore out. They don't get time off in between. And so when that day comes, and that's why it's so important, when that day comes that they get to go to training, it's everything to them. They don't get training all the time. Beginning of the year, they're going to get some, hey, this is ethics, this is firearms, this is, 3 hours of self-defense. Now make sure that you protect yourself. This is what's going to keep you alive, not,
Mhm.
so they get such little training that when I do come through, they're just ecstatic. They're just grasping for little morsels of information from other places. And one thing about me and you probably, we get to travel around, so I get to bring stuff that I've seen there and stuff I've seen there and bring it to these agencies, and they're just happy. And that's why I tell correctional trainers, if you don't do anything else, make sure that you're given good training. Don't show up in front of corrections guys with a PowerPoint, that's all full of words and you don't know your stuff and you're stumbling through it. It's important. It's the most important thing you can do for them. And that's part of the reason I went to work for Command Presence, because the owner called me up and he said, "You want to develop some training here?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm doing this. He said, "I want to give corrections the training they deserve." And I was like, wow. And so, yeah, I signed on. That was what got me when John Bostein told me that was the training they deserve, because they deserve as good a training as anybody else out there.
Yeah. Well, I would assume that it's got to be affordable, I'm sure, for the states to buy onto it, right? What are some of the courses that you would that are with that program?
Absolutely. I do want the thing people don't understand, when money comes to corrections budgets, it goes to inmates. Okay. We don't get first in line. After everything else is taken care of in the prison, then they'll give out training. Some of the stuff we're doing, leading without rank. We've done a report writing and testimony one. I'm doing one up at ILETA coming up here that we do called, When It Hits the Fan in the Cell Block. And it's all about, the first person on the scene and why those initial leadership decisions matter. Not EPO stuff, not, ICS, but the decisions that first supervisor on the scene makes and how that affects everything. Because we live in a different world when we have an emergency. There's nobody else to show up, and we can't cordon something off and shut down until it gets cleaned up. Because if I had 2 inmates fight, I've got 1,900 inmates that still want to eat chow. And so, we have a different dynamic inside, and ours is all about containment. Mm-hmm. That's another thing. Everything we do is about containment, because I have to catch it small, whether it's a fight, whether it's an assault, whether it's a riot in a housing unit. I don't want it in 3 housing units. So,
what's the name of that? What's the name of that? One more time. I want to, Amanda, maybe you can throw that up there. What's the name of that?
Yeah. When It Hits the Fan. When it hits
I'm talking about the company. The company.
Oh, Command Presence.
Command Presence.
They do a lot of law enforcement training. That's what John's been doing for, I think, a decade now. Okay. So we just brought on the corrections arm of it this year, and it's already growing. I just got another email today. We're going to Michigan. So
wow. And so the other thing that I've heard you talk about this, where some states you are literally commissioned police officers, somewhat. You have the same powers, and then there's others you have nothing. And I think I heard you say that you would rather, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might have misheard you, but I think that I heard you say you would rather the correction arm be corrections. It's not necessarily the full-blown police powers kind of a deal. Is that right? Is that kind of what you were saying?
Well, now California, New Jersey, full blown, and I think there's a couple of others. Those are police officers. They can walk out of the jail and get in a patrol car and go work the street. They have the same rights, same powers. We do get caught up in a lot of the, you've got certain things that you can do, certain laws that you can enforce as a correctional officer, but not all of them. So there are places where, and you'll see these guys get caught up. They show up with their badge and they try to pull somebody over on the street. And dude, you're a correctional officer. You don't have rights to pull people over for speeding or whatever. No, the thing about Jersey and California is they get paid very well. They get paid as police officers. So, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're very well trained. Corrections as a whole doesn't get very much case law. And I know as a police officer, you go through the academy, you're getting case law, you understand Graham versus Connor, you understand, this stuff. There's specific case law that has to do, with corrections. There is If you don't feed an inmate 3 meals a day, that's not just policy. There's federal laws, in place that say inmates get treated at a certain level. So I think some of that's missing sometimes. We don't quite get that out there because our academy is 3 weeks for everything. Yeah. Not 14 or 16 weeks where we get to spend some time and touch on stuff. I don't know of very many corrections academies that do ground fighting, jiu-jitsu. What do you think the chance of a correctional officer ending up on the ground in a fight during his career is?
Pretty high.
Yeah,
pretty high.
Why are
I would say, honestly, I think that the danger factor is much greater in there than it is for me out on the streets. Easy, because each and every day, and I mean, I would assume that you've probably even been stabbed over the course of your career.
Been caught a couple. I haven't been stabbed yet, but
oh, good. But you've known people that have been stabbed, no doubt, and it's just and you've definitely had fluids and everything else thrown your way. I have no doubt. But yeah, I think that this is great. I really do. I think that what you're doing is. I know that you said that there's some other people that are kind of doing some stuff. One guy from Nebraska that's kind of does some of this a little bit, but I think that you've really brought something to the table that is needed for your field. And what a great place to go just to listen to other people that have been involved in this industry. And I think that's really admirable of you to do that. So good job. And I'm going to continue to listen because, quite frankly, I could learn a lot. I've been learning some stuff just listening to these other correction officers because it's just dealing with people. It's that dealing with people that's pretty amazing. So any last words that you really want to throw out there for the listeners or somebody that's maybe thinking about doing this for a career other than buying your books, because I think that'd be a great start.
Yep. Listening to the podcast. We've got our 100th episode coming up here in 2 weeks. I've got Arcadia Congarati, which is Greg Williams and Brian Marin. They're huge into human behavior analysis. If you've ever heard of like Left of Bang, these are the guys that did that way back when. And I was so happy to get them on there. So they're on there for the 100th. And so if you get the chance, tune into that because that's for everybody. Everybody can have a little bit of awareness of their surroundings and stuff. But I just corrections is a good profession. We forget that, and that's what I want my podcast and my books and my articles to tell people. It's not just knuckle dragging. It's a profession. It's a career, and you can do well. I'm a living example of someone who made it, and I don't think I'm too crazy.
Good. Hey, he's got a YouTube page. We got to get off here. Amanda's probably going crazy in the back behind the curtain. But no, that's okay. I usually run late. That's a normal thing for me. So listen, you can check out his YouTube page. You can just search Mike Cantrell, the prison officer podcast, and it'll pop up, and all of his episodes on every streaming device that you can imagine. It's there. Check it out. Check out his books if you want to read some of those books. By all means, look at those. Ladies and gentlemen, happy Valentine's Day to everybody. I didn't mention that. And now I'm saying it. Well, and Mike, thanks for coming on Valentine's Day, man. My wife was like, somebody's coming on Valentine's. Yeah, Mike is, and I love it that you did. So thank you. And then the final thing I want to tell people: check out my YouTube page, Detective Jason White. Amanda, throw up that podcast it's Mike Elam. It's the Pusser slide. Throw it up if you can. If you can't, there you go. You can go to my page. You can go to my playlist. You can check that podcast that he just dropped on Thursday to get more of me. It's a double header for you, ladies and gentlemen. Leave here and go there and check it out. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Jackie and Travis and everybody, Sally, for being here next week, 7:00. Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate you, buddy.
Anytime.
And really, it's been an honor.
Great talking to you.
Amanda, stick around for a minute. Amanda, take us out.